about 3:15 a.m. If you're okay with that, I think that you and Esmeralda are gonna get along famously. As we leave this little Pueblo town behind, I would now like to go back into history, way back into history, about 10,000 years ago. Because here on the land, the Kumeyaay Indians lived here. For thousands of years, the Kumeyays, they had already established a trade system with the other tribes. The Kumeyaay, they had their own medicine. They had art. They had culture. They even had their own religion. And the way they practiced their religion, upon the death of a tribesman, they would prepare the body of that deceased.
Let's go surfing now. Ghost.
The ghosts are at it. They would prepare the body. They would build a funeral pyre. They would set the body on that funeral pyre and then set it on fire. The Kumeyaay Indians believed that by burning the body, it would release the soul back into the earth. It would release the spirit back into the universe. And they practiced this for thousands of years. But by the 1600s, the Spanish had arrived here. They had arrived with their religion. They began to convert the Kumeyaay Indians. They stopped that practice. But a few years later, the Kumeyays, they still felt that wasn't right. And so they met the Christians halfway. They would now build the funeral pyre once a year. Over the past year, those that had passed away in the tribe, they would gather all the personal belongings together. They would set those personal belongings on that funeral pyre and set those items on fire. Because they had truly believed that setting the personal effects would release the soul back into the earth. It would release the spirit back into the universe. The Kumeyaay Indians. And it was during the Spanish period that a Spanish soldier, he had met a beautiful Kumeyaay woman. They had fallen deeply in love, and they decided to get married. They began to start their family. They would go on to have 2 beautiful children together. But the trouble began after the children were born. That Spanish soldier, he had come from an aristocratic family. His family begins to put pressure on him. They tell him, if you do not send away your Kumeyaay wife and the children away, you will not receive the inheritance that is due you. To appease his family, he sends the Kumeyaay woman and the children away. Shortly after this, he married a Spanish woman. The Kumeyaay woman had heard about the marriage. She was upset. How could her unfaithful husband do this to her? And she felt the only way to get back is this soldier. She took those 2 beautiful children down to the river. She drowned them. The soldier heard about the drowning. He wanted to have the Kumeyaay woman arrested. They couldn't locate her anywhere. She was now roaming the area free. Well, it wasn't until a few years later, the Kumeyaay woman, she came to her senses, and she realized the horrid crime she had committed. And she knew now within her soul that upon her death, her spirit would not be allowed into the gates of heaven. In her guilt, she took herself down to the river, and she drowned herself. Many people that walk the river late at night, they claim they can hear the Kumeyaay woman as she wails because she is searching for her children. but she will never find them, for they are no more. And perhaps some night, as you too walk that riverbed, you might hear the wailing cries of the Kumeyaay woman. You might know her as La Llorona. Well, you might be thinking, okay, spirits, these are manifestations of people who were once alive. That's not necessarily so, and that's where our next story takes us to. The year is 1965, and born to the San Diego Zoo is a cute albino doe. They had named her Lucy. People from all over the world, when they visited the San Diego Zoo, they delighted in watching Lucy as she would frolic through the trees and as she would begin to grow. And she stayed with the San Diego Zoo for nearly 10 years. But by 1975, the zoo had more deer than they knew what to do with. They decided to sell off most of the deer. They sold Lucy to a private buyer. The private buyer didn't live far from here. He had an exotic ranch. He took Lucy home with him. He had built a beautiful enclosure for her with lots of room, and he would ensure that she would have plenty of food and water. And every morning, the private buyer, he would check in on Lucy. Well, on this one particular morning, when he checked on her enclosure, he couldn't find her anywhere. Somehow, Lucy had now gotten out, and Lucy was roaming the areas near Presidio Park and up here at the homes in Mission Hills. Now, the residents that lived up here, they didn't mind that Lucy was coming by and helping herself to their fruits and vegetables in their gardens. They were happy that Lucy would come by to visit them. But by 1976, talk of a freeway was being placed on the table. These residents felt, what if Lucy got too close to the freeway? She could be hit by a car. They felt the only thing they could do was to hire an animal control officer to come out to locate Lucy and relocate her. The animal control officer came out. It took him a few days to locate Lucy, but when he did, he had his tranquilizer gun all ready. Once he found Lucy, he loaded the tranquilizer gun with a dart. He took his aim and took the shot. The dart hits Lucy in the leg. Lucy goes down for a little nap. A short while later, the animal control officer, he begins to check on Lucy's vitals. He found that she didn't have any. He had used more tranquilizer than he should have. Lucy was now gone. And the residents that lived here, they were up in arms. But there was nothing they could do, for Lucy was now gone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our first stop of the night. And it will be at this site that perhaps you might see the spirit of Lucy as she roams through the trees and the homes of Mission Hills. You might see her wagging her cute little albino tail. We have arrived at our first destination tonight. I will meet each and every one of you next to that stone.
He was having trouble getting them to turn on, so I didn't need one. Don't show me face.
Speaker mode.
Welcome to the first stop of the night. We are at Pioneer Children's Park. This is a public park. I wanted to gather you around this stone because upon the stone contains the names of those that have generously given so that this park can run as a children's park. During the summer months, the city of San Diego, they will invite some of the local bands in the area to come out to perform here at the park. They will build an entertainment stage, and those local bands will come out to play a free concert for you. On a Sunday morning, if you wake up early, if you walk through the park, you might see yoga classes taking place on the greens. By Sunday afternoon, children are going to come out here to play a little wiffle ball. Sometimes they'll play a little baseball. Welcome to Pioneer Children's Park. It is a public park. But I must warn you, stay close to one another. As we travel through this park tonight, you may see something that you might find a bit disturbing. Follow me this way.
It's not like they have headstones here. It's not like we're walking on dead people or anything, right?
I'll share it.
You can show the table. Let's pretend that over for the first time.
And I thought one day we'll be on here at the chance to come to play. Chris what? Yes, and Chris Clark. She was here too. But she was. I don't know exactly where they are. I don't know what he was a lot.
By now, you've seen the items. They are behind me. Headstones? How could there be headstones in a children's park? Some years ago, each of these headstones had been dumped at the bottom of the gully. No one knows who did it. No one knows why they did it. They were retrieved and brought back up here to their rightful spot. Each of these headstones, they contain the names of the movers and the shakers of the 1800s. Those that formed that little Pueblo town at the bottom of the hillside. I will be introducing you to some of these people that I knew during my lifetime. as you walk through this section of the park, be very careful on where you're stepping. The grounds are littered with lots of gopher holes. These gopher holes were formed by zombie gophers. Follow me this way. You may have noticed that each of the headstones are uniquely designed. The first headstone I would like to introduce you to belongs to Reverend Anthony D. Ubach. Anthony D. Ubach. He arrived here on the shores of San Diego in 1866. He came from Barcelona, Spain. When he arrives here, he begins to make friends with all the local Indian tribes. He began to understand what the indigenous people were going through. But what he understood best is that the indigenous children, they were not getting the same kind of education the European children were receiving. Reverend Anthony D. Ubach, he would go on to form several schools. He would now begin to give the Kumeyaay children a proper education. He would also be responsible for building several churches in the area. Directly across the street from that ticket booth, did anybody notice that large church that was on the corner? That's the Church of the Immaculate Conception. He started building that church in 1868. It would not open up to the public for services until 1919. And that's because he began to divert his attention 3 miles in that direction. By 1890, that little Pueblo town began to die out. San Diego wanted to reinvent themselves. They scouted out for property. They found it 3 miles in that direction. They would then later call it Newtown. In Newtown, he would go on to form several schools. Throughout his lifetime, Reverend Ubach would go on to establish a cemetery. He named that cemetery Calvary Cemetery. Throughout his entire lifetime, Reverend Ubach continued to help the indigenous people. Reverend Anthony D. Ubach. That name sound familiar to you? James McCoy? This is the man that arrested Colonel Cave Johnson Coutts. James McCoy, he came from Antrim, Ireland in 1850. When he arrived here on the shores, he had some lofty ideas. But he needed a job. The first job he had received was being the county tax collector. I know what you're thinking. He must not have had any friends. Well, he did have a few enemies, but he also had a lot more friends than you think so. You see, as county tax collector, if you came to James McCoy and you told him, I don't have the full amount to pay my taxes, he would grant you extra time to pay your taxes. There are even a few instances where I saw James McCoy lend out his own money to those that couldn't afford to pay their taxes. There was a stipulation. At some point in time, you would have to pay him back. But you would never owe him any interest. He had a lot of friends as county tax collector. And because he had so many friends, they felt he needed a new job. So they hired him as sheriff. And he would act as the county sheriff for over 10 years. But 10 years later, he became restless. He wanted to now expand his civic duties. He would leave San Diego behind. He would head off to Washington, D.C. He would become a senator there. He was a senator for the 2nd District. He was a senator for nearly 20 years. He now returns to San Diego. He takes a bride. Him and his new bride would build a home together. They lived in that home for over 26 years. James McCoy, a tax collector, a sheriff, and a senator. Not sure if you can see the name carved on this stone. Cave Johnson Counts. This is the man that murdered me. Cave Johnson Counts, he was born to a relatively wealthy family. They would send him to West Point. He had graduated from West Point, but his grades really weren't that great. But he did manage to graduate. He also graduated along with Ulysses S. Grant. During the Mexican War, they would make their way out to California. Now, he served as an Army soldier for many years. When he arrived here to these shores, he too had now lofty ideas. He would study to become a lawyer. He served as a lawyer in town for many years. Shortly after this, he married Isadora Bandini. He would be awarded the Bandini Ranch. But after he got married to her, that's when he begins to change. He now begins to drink heavy. He could drink about 5 bottles of whiskey per day. Well, one day on the Guajome Ranch, as he was drinking, he decided to pick a fight with one of the tutors. That argument got overheated. He took his shotgun out and he shot her. He seriously injured her. She no longer had the use of her right arm. He would be arrested by James McCoy. He would stand trial. Counts had been acquitted for that shooting. There was a wedding that was supposed to take place at the church up in Oceanside. He had met some of the townsfolk there. There was a disease that was running rampant through the county. That disease was taking quite a bit of lives. But the scare was, upon this disease, if you died from it, you couldn't be buried. You would have to be incinerated. He had gone to a funeral at the church up in Oceanside. He got into an argument with those that were attending that funeral. He took his shotgun out and he shot every last one of them. He didn't kill him, but now he was arrested again by James McCoy. He stands trial. He had been exonerated for that shooting. Another instance on the ranch. Late one night, the ranch hands, they informed Colonel Counts. They saw 6 men riding along the range. They were out at the back 40. He grabs a bottle of whiskey, his shotgun, climbs aboard his horse. He meets those men up at the top of the ridge. Gets into an argument with them. He shoots every last one of them. He kills 2 of them, seriously injuring 4 others. He'd been arrested. He would stand trial. He had been exonerated for that shooting. Would this have anything to do with the fact that he was now one of the local judges? He died at the age of 51. He died of alcoholism. Reverend Ubach. He founded a cemetery, Calvary Cemetery. This headstone belongs to the caretaker of that cemetery. This is Peter O'Malley. He served as the caretaker to the land for most of his life. In 1933, Peter O'Malley died. No one stepped up to take care of the property. The cemetery begins to fall by the wayside, and it would do so for over 30 years. By the 1960s, according to California state law, that once a cemetery has fallen under disrepair, the city has the right to reclaim that property, and they can use it for whatever purpose they wish. And that's exactly what took place up here. The grass had grown so high, you couldn't see the headstones. And what was left of the headstones were crumbling. By the early 1960s, the city of San Diego brought dump trucks up here. They began to clear the field. They also brought a rock crusher up with them. They took what was left of the headstones. They ran them through the rock crusher. They would then crush them into fine dust and mix them with cement. The city then used that mixture to pave the roadway at the bottom of the hill. That is Washington Street. Listen carefully. Do you hear the sound of thumpity thumpity thump? Those tires are running over the headstones that were used to pave Washington Street with. Ladies and gentlemen, if you turn around, this is all that remains of Calvary Cemetery today. There are over 2,000 bodies that lay underneath this children's park. This park sees paranormal activity. One afternoon, a young mother brought her son up here to play. Her son was playing, but the mother noticed, see where the garbage cans are? She noticed there was a young boy there. He wasn't dressed like any of the other children, but he seemed to be in distress. He was crying. The mother approached that little boy, and she asked that little boy, "What's the matter?" She tells that young mother, "I've been searching for my mother all afternoon long. I can't seem to locate her anywhere." She asked him, "Where did you last see your mother?" He tells her, "I don't remember where they buried her." Look to your left. The monkey bars. Colonel Cave Johnson Counts and his family, they still lie underneath the ground at Calvary Cemetery at Pioneer Park. Take a few seconds to photograph each of these headstones, because in your photos, you might see the owners of those headstones, especially that of Colonel Cave Johnson Counts. Many people have come up with an image. It looks like he's holding a bottle of whiskey, and in his other hand, he's holding a shotgun. By the 1850s, a man by the name of Thomas Whaley, he would now come into San Diego. Thomas Whaley would go on to build Southern California's very first two-story brick mansion. As each of the family members began to pass away, their bodies were brought up here to Calvary Cemetery and they were buried. Years later, a new cemetery was now being built. It's called Mount Hope Cemetery. Each of the Whaley family members, their bodies were exhumed from this site. Today, you'll visit each of the family members at Mount Hope Cemetery. Let us return to the Ghost Coach.
play on the road.
Here we have a row of eucalyptus trees. All the grounds to the left. This was the Catholic cemetery. All the property to the right of those trees, that was the Protestant cemetery. San Diego suffers from a homeless problem. While we were in the park tonight, did you happen to see any homeless encampments up here? Perhaps they know something you don't.
We had a couple of us looking here.
Thank you.
Teacher, so he's the researcher. He didn't like it. We had to, I worked at it, so it wasn't exciting. Because it was kind of like, I knew my area, but it was fun. Not a lot of people. It was exciting.
Welcome back aboard your Trolley of Doom. Our driver tonight, Belle, she has graciously consented to driving each and every one of you to your final destinations tonight. I certainly hope that you had a wonderful walk in the park tonight. To our right, this is Ulysses S. Grant Elementary School. You know, I've been dead for so long I don't remember my days of elementary school. Is there anybody aboard that remembers your days of elementary school?
Yep.
Yeah.
What was your favorite moment of elementary school?
When I left it.
Did you like recess?
Of course.
Kind of like leaving? Well, in the 1800s, recess was a big hit with the children. During recess, the children would all gather together on the grass. They would form a circle and hold hands, and now they would begin to sing a cheery children's tune. Do children still sing that cheery tune today during recess? And do you know what the name of that tune is? Very good, Ring Around the Rosie. And I just happen to have a completely different version to Ring Around the Rosie. I hope you'll like this version. Yes, quite the cheery children's tune, isn't it? But did you know that it wasn't written as a children's tune at all? Originally, it was written as a poem that would describe to you what you would go through if you contracted the Black Plague. So let's go line by line on this song. Ring Around the Rosie. Once you contracted the Black Plague, the first thing that would happen to you is that a pimple would form on your neck and your lymph nodes. And as it would begin to form, a black ring would form at the base of the pimple. The pimple would then begin to grow in size, and the top of the pimple would now glow bright red. And hence we have Ring Around the Rosie. A pocket full of posies? Well, that pimple grew in such a size that once it ruptured, it would begin to smell and pustulate. A horrid smell would now generate from your neck. You were already beginning to rot even before you were dead. Friends and loved ones, they would place posies in your pockets to help ward off that horrid smell. This was our 14th century air freshener. Ashes to ashes. Well, once you died of the Black Plague, your body couldn't be buried. It would have to be incinerated. Then the last line of the song, we all fall down. Well, that's when death finally arrives, and death takes you. So what do you say, friends? Let's sing this cheery children's tune together, shall we? Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And now you have learned how you would die from the Black Plague. Now, death in the 1800s, you didn't have the kind of medical resources that you do today. Upon the death of a loved one, we did not have the wherewithal to place our ear, because sometimes they had just fallen into a very coma. We did not have the medical wherewithal to place a mirror underneath their nose to get their breath. And the best that we could do, we would place the body in a coffin. We'd now bring the coffin and the body into a large room that we called the parlor. The body would lie in state for nearly 2 weeks. This allowed family members that did not live in the same town the opportunity to ride into town and pay respects before we buried the body. But during that 2-week period, we were ever hopeful that maybe, just maybe, that body just might wake up. I believe that in your funeral parlors, you hold awake. And when it came to burying our friends and loved ones, when we weren't sure that they were completely dead or not, we were burying them alive. Archaeologists throughout the United States have dug up many a cemetery. When they open up the coffin lids, they have found fingernails embedded in the top of the coffin lid. They did wake up. They were panicking. They were trying to scratch their way out. Once we caught on to what perhaps was going on, we would now bury friends and loved ones with picks and shovels. Now, if they happened to wake up and realize the grave danger they were in, they could dig their way out. I had a friend who always thought about death. His name is George Bateson. George Bateson, he built a device. He built a device because he was so afraid that one day soon he could be buried alive. And the way that the item he built was working, at the top of the coffin lid, they would cut a hole in that lid. They would take rope or string, bringing it all the way in to the coffin. They would tie one end of the rope or the string to the loved one's foot or their wrist. The other side of the rope or the string was brought up to the top of the gravesite. At the top of the gravesite there was a stick that looked like a Y or a V. They would stick it into the ground, draping the rope or the string over that Y or V. And then at the end they would attach a bell to it. And that way, if your loved one happened to wake up and they realized the grave situation they were in, they would begin to panic. They would flail about. It would now cause the rope or the string to vibrate. Now there was a person that had the job of watching the graveyard all night. He had the graveyard shift. Well, his job was to listen for the bell. Now, if you happen to wake up, you begin to panic. That's when the bell would ring. But hopefully, the person that was watching the graveside all night was awake. And if they were awake, they would dig you out. You would now be saved by the bell. George Bateson, he thought about death way too often. It got to him one day. He took flammable liquid, he poured it all over himself. He lit a match and set himself on fire. George Bateson committed suicide. I talked to George about that incident after his death. I did tell George I perfectly understand that you didn't want to be buried alive. But George, is that any reason to go making an ash of yourself? We are now arriving at our second destination. Be sure to take all of your personal belongings with you. I can guarantee that none of you will be coming back aboard your trolley of doom. I will meet each and every one of you on the sidewalk.
Dying to get off? Whether you're going north by northwest or wherever, remain seated until we come to a complete stop. Don't be indiscreet. Use the handrails. Good night.
Welcome to the second stop of the night. We are at the oldest Southern California cemetery. This is the El Campo Santo Cemetery. It was constructed in 1847. According to the legend of this graveyard, there are 477 bodies that are buried over the wall. But take a look. Does that look like 477 bodies could fit in there? Yeah, you're right, because they're not. Because some of them are beneath your feet. The El Campo Santo Cemetery. It was a lot larger. Where the stop sign is, at the bottom of the hill. That was where the cemetery wall was. By the 1930s, Old Town completely died out. New Town was flourishing. The city of San Diego, they wanted a way to link Old Town to New Town. They felt the only way to do that was to build a trolley line. They took the headstones and pulled them up, but they left the bodies behind. They would go on to build a trolley line. It linked Old Town to New Town. The thing about cemeteries is that any time that a cemetery is decimated, that's when you will experience paranormal activity. Many of our guests tell us as they stand outside these walls, they have seen groups of people, men, women, and children. They're all dressed in Victorian-style clothing. They will watch them enter through the gate. They will follow them. They can't locate them anywhere. During the 1980s, a Hollywood director, he went on to film a movie. His name is Steven Spielberg. Do you happen to remember what the name of that movie was? Very good, Poltergeist. Yeah, what was the theme of that movie?
Cemetery.
Absolutely. And when you disturb a cemetery, that's when paranormal activity will now take place. Across the street is the Don Pietro restaurant. On Friday and Saturday nights, the barkeeps, they begin to close up the bar at about 12:30, 1 a.m. They will take the glasses and stack them in a asymmetrical shape. They turn around for 20 minutes, and now the glasses are completely stacked differently. Their cars are parked here along San Diego Avenue. When they get ready to leave at 2 or 2:30 in the morning, they insert the key into the car. It won't start. They'll call AAA out. AAA will diagnose the vehicle. They can find nothing wrong with it. They only had to wait half an hour. They were then able to drive off. On this cemetery wall, notice the placard. During the 1990s, students from the UCSD Archaeological Department, they were given a new toy. This was a sonar device. They could send sound down into the ground. If it hit something solid, it would come back with a photograph. Here are the walls to the cemetery. Notice the boxes. They coincide the bodies that lay beneath your feet. They also realized the smaller boxes. They're in the center of the street. That was the children's cemetery. Step into the El Campo Santo Cemetery. The translation is the Holy Field. I'm going to introduce you to the people that I knew that are buried here during my lifetime. first grave marker belongs to James W. Robinson. That was his given Christian name. He's best known as Yankee Jim Robinson, one of San Diego's most notorious criminals. He would be hanged at San Diego's execution grounds. And on the day of his hanging, everything that could possibly go wrong would go wrong on that hanging. The device they hanged him on consisted of 3 parts. 2 10.5-foot posts embedded into the girth. A single support beam. The hangman threw the noose over the support beam. The average height for most men in the 1800s, about 5'3" to 5'7". Yankee Jim was slightly taller. They had measured him at 6 feet 4 inches. Thomas Whaley, there's that name again. He donated a cart they would stand Yankee Jim Robinson upon. They stood him on the cart. The rope was tied around his neck. The hangman takes his whip, striking the horse on the rear end. The horse does not bolt forward. The hangman has to walk that horse along, about 5 or 6 feet. Yankee Jim falls from the back of the wagon. The rope isn't short enough. His boots are barely scraping the ground. Yankee Jim begins to spin around on that rope. It takes him approximately 15 minutes as he slowly strangles to death. They didn't cut him down after the hanging. They let him dangle at the end of the rope all night long. They cut him down the next morning, placing his body on the wagon. They paraded his body down San Diego Avenue. The grave was dug. The box they would stuff him in, it was ready. The box is too short. They lay Yankee Jim face down on the ground. 2 men bent his legs as far back as they could, but he still wouldn't fit in the box. They begin to jump up and down on his legs until they hear the sound of snap, crackle, and pop. They broke his legs at the kneecap. They stuffed him in the box, and this is where they buried him. To those of you that are standing closest to Yankee Jim's grave, in a few seconds, you too might begin to feel a little wobbly at the knees. James W. Robinson, Yankee Jim Robinson, San Diego's notorious criminal. This marker belongs to Thomas W. Tanner. He was an actor from New York City. He arrived here on the shores of San Diego. He would now meet up with Thomas Whaley. Oh, there's that name again. The 2 men met. They would cut a deal. Tanner would establish San Diego's very first commercial theater upon the 2nd floor of Thomas's 2-story brick mansion. That theater opened in 1868. It opened as scheduled. But 21 days after that theater opened, Tanner dies inside one of the rooms on the 2nd floor of that house. He died of a mysterious cause. The townsfolk say it is the curse of Yankee Jim Robinson. It'll be up to you to decide if that curse exists. But at the start of the tour, ladies, I think I may have mentioned that at one of the sites, you might feel a presence standing next to you. And what if that presence decides to stand behind you and give you a hug? Or what if this presence decides to play with your hair? It is the spirit of Thomas W. Tanner. He was always known to be quite the ladies' man. But I believe that ladies today, you call men that behave in this manner perverts. Yes, step close. Step close. Could I please have a volunteer from the group step forward?
I nominate him.
Thank you so much. Come on down. Look upon the name on this next grave marker. Upon seeing the name, please turn around and loudly announce who is buried here. It's Juan Mendoza. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where they buried me. Did you notice? There's a tree that grows above my gravesite. Well, it's my understanding that in your world today, upon your death, you can elect to have your body cremated. You can then donate your ashes to grow a tree with. Ladies and gentlemen, the tree and I, we are one. We're now making our way to San Diego's execution grounds.
It wasn't a free site. It was time to put Yankee Chin in the ground, but they didn't have a coffin big enough. And they weren't going to build Yankee Chin to his own coffin. So I had this bright idea, as they always do.
Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't want you leaving this grave site. I didn't want you leaving the grave site, going home to tell your family members that you found Jesus. It's pronounced Jesus.
I think it's a good one.
Perhaps we should all meet here for dinner one night.
Goldstone. Here we go. Huh?
Colonel Counts! No! Hey, wait a minute! On the morning of February the 6th, 1865, this is the spot that Colonel Cave Johnson Counts murdered me in cold blood. I had died upon the dusty streets of San Diego. Behind you was the butcher shop. Notice what the shop is called today. And this has been one of the most chillingest stories you've heard all night. Welcome to San Diego's execution ground. The ground you will be walking on will be uneven. Please watch your step and follow me. Welcome to San Diego's execution grounds. The grounds was actually used as an execution grounds for nearly 100 years. Many men would be hanged here on the property. The last hanging was that of Yankee Jim in 1852. Thomas Whaley watched the hanging of that man. He wasn't part of the execution squad. A few years later, the county put the property up for sale. It was at a good price. Thomas Whaley bought the property. He begins to build on it. But the moment he begins to build on it, Thomas begins to suffer one financial loss after another. He had built his home upon grounds that were used for negative purposes. It would be shortly thereafter that once they moved into the house, the first family death occurred. It was in the nursery. Their 17th-month-old son, Thomas Whaley Jr. He dies of scarlet fever. He was the first family member to die. In 1868, Thomas Whaley met Tanner. They opened up the first theater on the second floor. 21 days later, Tanner died on the second floor. It was on the tail of this event that their young daughter, Violet Eloise Whaley, would marry. She was quite young. She was only 19. But the man she married, she hardly knew. And just a few months after they were married, the day before Valentine's Day, the man she married, George Bertolacci, he handed Violet a letter. It was an apology note. The letter stated, "My dear Violet, I'm not the man you think I am. I married another woman. I have fathered a child with that woman. I'm a horrible husband. But Violet, I'm going to go away now. I'm going to work on myself. It could take 3, 4, maybe 5 years. But once I get done working on myself, I'll come back to fully support you." This did not sit well with Anna and Thomas Whaley. They would now force her daughter into a divorce. The divorce comes through. The ladies in town, they were saying horrible things about Violet. My goodness, what did Violet do to run her husband off like that? They didn't have the full story. But Violet listened to what the ladies in town were saying about her. And she begins to fall into a very deep depression. And one afternoon, from the window on the left, that was her bedroom window, she opens up the window, steps out onto the roof. Where that tree is on the left, Thomas built the well there. The well was filled with water. She threw herself off the roof and cast herself down into that well. But Violet is wearing a hoop skirt. It hit the water and it balloons upward. Thomas heard the commotion going on. He rescues his daughter, but he's concerned about her. If she does this once, she's going to do it again. He places Violet on suicide watch for a year and a half. But after the year and a half, it looked like Violet's life was changing for the better. She seemed happy. She had even joined a singing group. But Violet approached her father, and she told Thomas, "Father, I'm beginning to feel different about my life. I wish to write my thoughts and feelings down on paper. Father, could you please hand me the keys to your writing desk in your study?" Thomas didn't have any objections to this. It could be therapeutic. He handed Violet the keys. He forgot there was one key he did not want her to have. That key belonged to the lockbox underneath his desk. And in the lockbox is where Thomas had stored his pistol. We don't know when she acquired that gun. What we do know about the rest of the tale, Thomas had scheduled the family to go out for a little ride in the countryside. Thomas wakes up at 6 a.m. He comes down the staircase, exiting out the double doors. He walks out to the barn. He'll prepare the horse and the carriage. Violet woke up the same time her father did. She followed Thomas out of the house. Only she came out here to the outhouse. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Thomas had the horse and carriage prepared. Thomas went back into the house. He was standing in the dining room. Somewhere on the dining room table, there was a bowl of fresh peaches. Thomas picked up a peach and he thought to himself, Violet loves peaches. And Thomas knew that Violet was out here in the outhouse. Thomas opened up that kitchen window. He called out to Violet, "Violet, are you almost ready?" Her response was quick. "Yes, Father." But now 25 minutes would lapse, and she didn't come out. Thomas called out a second time, "Violet, are you almost ready?" There was no response. But a few seconds later, Thomas hears a single gunshot ring out. She got a hold of her father's pistol. She took the barrel of the gun, pressed it up against her chest. She slowly cocks the hammer back, and then she squeezes the trigger. The gun discharges, and it recoils. The bullet hit her in the chest. Thomas bolted out the door, but he realized she had locked that outhouse door. He ran back to the barn. He grabbed his axe. Thomas had to frantically cut his way into the outhouse. Violet is slumped over. She's bleeding profusely. Thomas scooped his daughter up in his arms. He kicked in one of the double doors as he ran her back into the house. Anna Whaley heard the same shot her husband did. Anna Whaley was standing at the top of the staircase as she watched Thomas kick that door in. As she stood there, her breath was now taken away. Thomas and Violet were completely covered in blood. Thomas begins to utter something underneath his breath. At first, Anna couldn't hear the words. But halfway through the hallway, Anna Whaley hears these words. Mama, Violet just shot herself. Mama, Violet just shot herself. His voice was still cracking. Mama, Violet shot herself. The time was 6:35 a.m. Thomas realized it's still too early. The doctor wouldn't be at the office. All Thomas could do was to cradle Violet in his arms in the study. He cradled Violet in his arms until he watches his daughter draw her very last breath. Violet committed suicide at the age of 22 in 1885. The death of Violet was too much. Thomas boards up the house. But the new house was waiting for them down on State Street. He'd been waiting for several months, and had not Violet committed suicide, they were going to move into that new home anyway. 5 years to the date of Violet's death, at the age of 67, Thomas Whaley dies inside the new home down on State Street. Thomas died of a broken heart. Each of the family members, after their death, they have all come back to the property. They haunt the house. They must have loved this house. There are 33 to 35 spirits that not only haunt the house, but also the property. Historic Tours of America, they acquired the house 2 years ago. They've been running ghostly tours through this house. I highly recommend you come during the day. You can photograph the beautiful furniture pieces within the home. But you also don't want to miss their nightly ghost tours so that you can experience the paranormal activity that runs through the rooms. The Whaley House now proudly presents their after-hours paranormal investigations. You will be taught by a paranormal investigator how to operate high-tech ghost hunting equipment. And then they will lock you inside the Whaley House until nearly 1 a.m. It is not a tour of the house. It's a one-on-one with the spirits that haunt the inside of the Whaley House. They're after-hours paranormal investigations. I would like to thank each and every one of you so much for choosing the Ghosts and Gravestones tour tonight. Before I let you go, I would like to leave you with one final thought. Tonight, we walked where spirits dwell. I told the tales I had to tell. And as I lay asleep in my bed tonight, I shall not fear the visits of the dead. But those who have to fear the most of these ghosts are those who did not thank their host. Thank you so much for taking the Ghosts and Gravestones tour tonight. I had a wonderful time. Happy hauntings. I have been your ghost host, Juan Mendoza. I also have a few comment cards here. My boss is in Florida. They read these comment cards. Once they read them, they'll send them back to me. So be sure to take a guest copy. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, guys. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much.